Pebble Shore. Tonight we're going to visit a quiet, hidden cove where the sand is made of sea-smoothed glass, worn soft by the tides until it glints like jewels. We'll walk slowly along this shore of coloured fragments, watching them sparkle in shallow tide pools as the light fades and the waves breathe in and out. The path down to Pebble Shore begins at the edge of a low, wind-stunted pine grove. The air here already smells faintly of salt and drying seaweed, a different kind of forest scent, sharper and cleaner. Under your feet, the ground changes from pine needles to hard packed earth, then to old concrete steps that lead down toward the sound of the ocean. The steps are chipped at the edges, their corners rounded by time, with a wooden railing on one side that has been bleached almost silver by the sun. As you descend, the murmur of the waves becomes clearer, not crashing, but a steady hush and pull, like someone slowly pouring water back and forth in a long basin. At first, the beach looks grey and ordinary in the distance, a band between the water and the darker rocks. As you come closer, the grey begins to break into patches of faint colour, little points of green and brown and pale blue. Another few steps, and the band of grey resolves into thousands upon thousands of tiny pieces, glass worn small and soft, spread out in a shining layer. You reach the last step and stand there for a moment, letting your eyes adjust, until the whole shore seems to tremble with pinpoints of colour every time a wave draws back. When you step off the last concrete stair, the ground feels different from sand. The glass pebbles give way under your weight with a gentle crunch that is more like a soft clink, as if you were walking on a floor of distant, muffled chimes. Each piece is small enough to rest comfortably against the sole of your shoe, rounded from years of tumbling in the surf, their sharp edges long ago worn smooth. Near your feet, you can see pale green fragments that were once ordinary bottles, now turned milky by the sea, their surfaces frosted and velvety. Here and there are thicker pieces of brown glass, almost coffee-coloured, and rare flashes of cobalt blue that catch your eye immediately. A wave washes in and spreads a thin sheet of water over the glass, and for a moment the colours deepen, as if someone has polished each piece by hand. When the water drains away again, the pebbles dull just a little, but the light inside them remains, like a memory of the wave that has just passed. You shift your weight and hear that soft clinking sound again, a private music that belongs only to this shore. At the high tide line, worn driftwood logs sit half buried in the glass, their cracked surfaces catching stray pieces that lodge in the grain like tiny jewels. Down closer to the water's edge, the beach flattens, and the glass is pressed in more firmly among small grey stones. Little runnels have been carved by the retreating waves, narrow tracks where water still trickles, turning the glass pieces it passes over brighter and clearer. When you crouch down, you can see that many fragments are almost perfectly oval or round, like sweets laid out in a jumble. Some are big enough to fill your palm. Others are no larger than a grain of rice. Tiny specks of colour that add up to a shimmering background. A wave rolls in, the foam pushing ahead of it like a soft white lace, and then slips down around your boots, covering the glass in a shallow sheet. Under that clear layer, everything sharpens. Greens, ambers, a dull red that looks almost like a small berry. As the water drains away, the pieces seem to sigh back into dullness. But if you tilt your head just a little, they still glint wherever a droplet lingers. Further along, a wider band of glass has settled into a slight dip in the shoal, forming a kind of natural basin. Here, the fragments are packed so thickly that the spaces between them almost vanish, forming a solid, shining carpet that reflects the sky in broken pieces. Between the glassy stretches, clusters of dark rocks rise out of the shore, their sides slick with seaweed and spray. In the hollows between these rocks, the tide has left pools of still water, each one a tiny world. The bottoms of these tide pools are lined with glass instead of sand. The pieces here smaller and more uniform, like grains that have been sifted by the patient motion of the sea. In one pool, The glass is mostly pale green, giving the water a faint, bottle-colored glow, even as the sky above turns slowly toward evening. In another, there is a scatter of amber and clear pieces around a central stone, so that the pool looks almost like a pendant set in a rough metal frame. Small snails cling to the rock walls, their shells ringed with subtle patterns of cream and brown, and their slow movements barely disturb the glass beneath them. A tiny fish, no longer than your finger, darts from one side of a pool to the other, its body flashing silver as it passes over different colored fragments. When it pauses, hanging almost motionless above the glass, its scales pick up hints of green and blue from below, as if the colors are being borrowed for just a moment. The surface of the water trembles whenever a breeze passes over, breaking the reflections into shifting shapes that slide across the glassy bottom and disappear. In one of the pools near your feet, a small hermit crab is making its slow way along the bottom. Its borrowed shell is plain and chalky, but all around it the glass glitters in soft colours, so the crab looks like a careful traveller walking across a floor of scattered treasure. Every few steps it pauses, lifting one claw slightly, as if testing the surface for stability, and then continues on. When it reaches a patch where the glass pieces are slightly larger, it has to clamber over them, its legs sinking a little between the rounded edges before finding grip. The shell tilts to one side for a moment, but the crab easily corrects, used to this uneven terrain. A strand of seaweed drapes into the water from the pool's edge, swaying gently with each faint movement of the tide, brushing across the tops of the glass without disturbing them much at all. Near the crab, a cluster of anemones cling to a low rock, their short tentacles opening and closing rhythmically, a slow breathing motion that continues whether the pool is watched or not. Tiny bubbles are trapped among the glass, clinging to the sides of the pieces like clear beads. When one finally lets go and floats to the surface, it distorts the reflections of the sky for a brief second before popping silently. You step back from the pool and walk slowly along the line where the highest waves reach, where the glass gives way to more ordinary stones and strips of dried seaweed. Each step makes the same quiet clink, tilting pieces aside and pressing some farther into the packed layer beneath. Now and then, something different catches your eye. A chunk of pale ceramic with a faded blue pattern. Maybe once part of a plate, now as smooth as a river stone. A piece of clear glass that has turned almost white from years of sun and salt. When you bend to pick one up, the piece is cool at first against your palm, then warms quickly from your skin. Held up to the fading light, each fragment looks different from how it did on the ground. The frosted surface glows softly, and if the glass is thin enough, the sky behind it turns a muted version of its color. Blue diluted to a gentle haze. Green, like the inside of a shallow lake. You turn the piece back and forth, watching the way it catches the last rays of the sun, and then let it fall back among its companions with a soft tick. Around you, the shallow rumble of the waves grows and subsides, that always returns, a steady rhythm for your quiet exploring. You are not the only one walking Pebble shore tonight. Farther along the beach, an older man with a canvas bag slung across his shoulder moves carefully among the glass, always looking down. Every few steps he bends, his hand hovering for a moment as he chooses between 2 or 3 pieces, then selecting just one to drop gently into his bag. From here you can see flashes of blue whenever the bag opens, a concentrated sky color that is rare on the ground. A little nearer to the rocks, a pair of friends sit on a driftwood log, their shoes resting on the glass, softly rocking their feet back and forth, so that the pebbles murmur beneath them. They have made a small pile between them, sorting pieces by color into tiny heaps. Green, brown, clear. The occasional bit of red set aside, as if it were something especially precious. One of them holds up a thick piece of glass with ridges along one side, turning it so the light catches the grooves, and the other leans closer to see, both of their faces glowing faintly in the reflected light. A little way off, near the base of the cliff, a family has started a loose circle of glass around a flat rock, placing the brightest pieces at the top, as if outlining a sun. Even though everyone is doing something, the beach feels quiet. Each person wrapped in their own slow activity, moving with the same unhurried rhythm as the waves. As the evening deepens, the light takes on a warmer tone, and the glass responds in its own way. The pale pieces, almost colourless during the day, now reflect streaks of apricot and soft pink from the sky, so that the whole shore seems to blush very faintly. The greens darken to something like seaweed in shade, while the browns become richer, like polished wood. The tide pools hold the last of the clear blue overhead for a little longer, their surfaces mirroring the sky, even as the edges around them grow dim. On the far side of the cove, a low cliff casts its shadow onto the beach, and in that shaded band, the glass glints less, but the shapes show more. Curves and chips and softly broken corners. A gull stands near the waterline, one leg tucked up, eyeing the ground as if considering whether any of these strange pebbles might be edible, then deciding against it and turning its attention back to the sea. Out beyond the breakers, a small boat moves slowly across the horizon, its lights just beginning to show as tiny points. Each time a wave comes in, the wet glass near your feet shines brighter than the dry parts above, drawing a moving line of brightness that advances and retreats with the water. The sound of the ocean keeps its steady pace, and every now and then a single louder wave sends a brief run of glass fragments sliding over each other with a richer, deeper clink before settling back into place. Eventually you find a place to sit. A wide, smooth piece of driftwood, half buried at an angle in the glass. Its surface is worn almost silky, with faint ridges where the grain once was, and your hand finds a comfortable place to rest along its curve. From here the view stretches down the shore, the glass pebbles merging into a pale band between the darker rocks and the darker sea. You can see how the tide has formed gentle ridges and troughs in the beach, long, low ripples that run parallel to the water, each one catching light differently. A few feet in front of you, you trace a small circle in the glass with the toe of your shoe, nudging the pieces into a shallow ring. Within that circle, you start arranging fragments by colour. placing blue next to green, green next to clear, making a simple pattern that stands out against the mixed background. The tiny clicks as each piece touches another, are quiet but distinct up close, like very faint beads being poured from one palm to another. Around your little circle, the unarranged glass looks almost like a field, and your pattern becomes just one small, deliberate shape in the middle of it. If a larger wave reaches this far, it will wash over and scatter everything again. But for now, the circle holds. Above you, the first few stars appear in the dimming sky, their light too faint yet to reflect in the glass, but already present, waiting for true night. Little by little, the colour drains from the sky, leaving a deepening blue that creeps upward from the horizon. A thin crescent moon hangs above the water, not yet bright, but enough to throw a soft path of pale light across the sea. When waves break, their edges catch that light for a heartbeat, making a line of silver foam that curls and then disappears. Down at your feet, the glass takes on a subtler shine, less about vivid colour now, and more about highlights and small glows. A clear piece reflects the moon as a tiny distorted shape. A green shard shows it as a vague, hazy smudge. As your eyes adjust, you begin to notice how the wet patches gleam more strongly, so that the shore seems to have scattered patches of soft starlight lying on it. Here and there, a particularly smooth fragment reflects a point of light across its whole surface, and then lets it go again when you tilt your head. The sounds of the other visitors fade, as some of them make their way back up the path, their footsteps on the glass becoming distant and then gone. The beach feels even quieter now. Just the hush of the waves and the occasional call of a bird settling somewhere on the rocks for the night. Closer to the water, you wander again, letting your steps follow the line where each wave reaches before pulling back. In the dimness, the individual colours of the glass are harder to tell apart, but their rounded shapes underfoot are unmistakable. You notice how the pieces near the tide line are almost always cooler to the touch, freshly rinsed by the sea, while those higher up have held on to a bit of the day's warmth. Bending down, you cup a small handful of glass in your palm, lifting it slowly. The pieces slide against one another with a low, pleasant rustle before settling into the bowl of your hand. Held close, they look almost uniform now. Pale forms that catch the moonlight in different ways. Some bright, some muted. When you tilt your hand, a few fragments tumble back to the ground, returning with soft ticks as they find their places among the others. You let the rest follow, your hand empty again, but the faint impression of their cool weight lingers for a moment. The tide continues its patient work, sorting and smoothing, grain by grain, fragment by fragment. The motion so slow across years that it is almost impossible to imagine, yet very easy to hear in the simple back and forth of the water tonight. After a while, you return to the base of the steps where you first came down. The concrete edge, now a dark shape above the glittering strip of beach. You turn once more to look along Pebble shore, now mostly silver and grey under the moon, with only the faintest hints of colour when the light catches a piece just right. The driftwood logs are darker humps along the high tide line, their outlines softened by the night, and the rocks that hold the tide pools are low shadows against the soft brightness of the water. Somewhere among those pools, the hermit crab has found a crevice to settle in. The snails have drawn in their feelers, and the tiny fish drift more slowly over their glassy floors. The older man with the canvas bag is gone. The circle of glass around the family's rock is either scattered by the tide or waiting to be discovered in the morning, half intact. All the little arrangements and patterns made today will either shift or stay, depending on how far the water reaches. But the shore itself remains, a long, patient work of the sea. You rest your hand for a moment on the worn wooden rail of the stairs, feeling the smoothness that comes from many such pauses before yours. Then you begin to climb, step by step. The sound of the glass under your feet fading as you rise. At the top, among the pines, the air smells more of earth again, and the ocean is once more only a steady murmur behind you, carrying with it the faint imagined clink of countless pieces of sea glass turning gently in the dark.